that Egress Burroughs art chronology. No files
Oh,
sit in yet. All this tons and tons of work on it. The glass water goes over the whole thing. And I mean, the whole picture just starts fritzing, and I'm hitting the power button as fast as I can to force power it off.
God,
Turn
that'd
it
be
up.
frightening.
Oh, I know. Fortunately, it was just a glass of distilled water. I mean, it had nothing in it but just pure water. Turned it upside down. Went and grabbed like a hair dryer, and just glass of distilled water.
Yeah, that's us. I put the video on my phone so I can watch the chats come in.
Okay, and just use the hair dryer with. Obviously, I don't use a hair dryer, but it's something old that had sitting around the house for decades, and you took the heat all the way off because you don't want to put heat on that, and just dried it out quite a bit, very well. Powered it back up, and it came back to life. Boy, I was sweating that one.
Yeah, because I'm sure you didn't have. Well, you probably had backups of everything, but
not enough though.
Not enough.
You always don't want to count on those backups,
No, I used to work in an IT place, and we had backups, and it was a religious thing. They took the backups every night. Every night they took the backups. And then came the time when, hey, the system failed. Let's go to the backups. You know what they've never done? They've never tried to restore from the backups before.
I found out they weren't working.
We had months and months of backups that were not useful at all.
Wasteful.
So we got people coming in. Got one person coming in, and hopefully he's going to bring more people in with him. We just got started, so, and we're early a little bit, which is normal.
Yeah, when I worked at International Graphics, I was in one of the duties I was doing. I was in charge of the purchasing, and I kept telling this one guy who's the head of the IT that you need to get uninterrupted power backup on your systems. He's like, "Oh, no worry, we do backups every night. We don't have to worry about that." Well, not only did they have a major power outage that lost all their data, they hadn't been doing their backups. Oh, and you hate to prophesize something that ends up costing the guy his job, but he lost his job over that. If he just listened to me, he'd been fine.
When I worked in North Carolina at an IT shop, we had uninterruptible power supplies and everything. Oh, we're talking computer stuff. We're supposed to be talking comics, but we'll get there, I promise. And we had, a development machine, we had a production machine, we had a gateway, we had a bridge, and UPS is on everything except the bridge. So when the power went off that one time and everything powered off and it came back up, it didn't come up right.
Oh, wow.
So we found out in the middle of the afternoon that 100 people on the floor were taking production orders and saving them on the development machine. So nothing was getting shipped for anything that was taking orders on. And the IT manager got fired for that.
I bet he did, yeah.
The CEO asked him, why didn't you have a UPS on that? And his answer was, we didn't think we needed one. Wrong answer.
Right.
George Peter Gatsis, thanks for chiming in there. Greetings to you too, my friend. Thanks for coming by.
George. Yeah, when I opened up my stores, and obviously I've been doing this 37 years, right? As soon as backup sources were made, you get batteries you put on your at affordable rate. I had them on all my equipment once I started going over computerized, and I had some trouble. There was a place I don't want to say their name, because even though they're not in business anymore, but it was a dial-up internet provider. Well, at first, the internet was really booming for them, before they got knocked out by DSL and all the other stuff. But they decided they wanted to get my space, and they thought they'd just chase me off. So they were just really terrible neighbors for a while. And I remember one day, and they did not have uninterrupted backups on their equipment. Well, then one day, the lights flicker on and off. I'm fine because I had backups on all my computers, but obviously these guys are running a internet providing service, right? And all of a sudden you start hearing them intoning God's name very loudly through the walls. I mean, and I have to admit, I did not mind hearing it because they were really rotten neighbors. I mean, they just did all sorts of really nasty stuff. One time the manager even got out in front of all my parking lots with a can of spray paint, was spray painting the name of their business, parking only, on the parking lot. I just washed her, called up the landlord. Landlord got a painter, had to remove it, sent them the bill. So you can't just take his parking. So they were just trying to do everything they could. And then when they finally moved, they said, they were getting real mad at me when they relocated to where they eventually went out of business. And they were like, the guys just started yelling at me. Do you know how expensive it is to move? Do you realize how expensive it is? I said, yeah. Now, you know what? I didn't want to move. And he got this look on his face like, oh, I never thought about your side of things.
It's amazing how much your opinion changes of somebody when you look at it from their perspective.
Exactly. But nobody ever does.
Well, the last time we had John Michael, we had quite the comic book confab going on, because we had you, the local comic shop guy who is on the front lines of getting these comic books into the hands of consumers. And we had Peter Samedi on, who is a publisher at Alterna Comics. And since that time, Peter has had an interesting experience. You've already heard a little bit about this, at least, where he was doing a live stream for Alterna Comics. And in the middle of his live stream, there was a knock at the door, and he had guns drawn on him because somebody had called the police in his town and impersonated him, spoofed his number, and basically said that they were Peter Simeti and that he had stabbed his girlfriend and was feeling suicidal.
Right. Yeah. Boy. Yeah.
So the SWAT team was on hand. So things have not been great for Peter this week. We're hoping they find out who did that. I mean,
Let's give
what
out
the hell, you know?
Yeah, I know. We'll give out a shout out to the SWAT team though for being so responsible and not overreacting to the situation. They thought they were coming into a hot situation, quickly recognized it. Peter is still with us today, so obviously they did not overreact. And I mean, too often, all you hear is negative things about the police whenever they, something goes wrong. But here's a case where everything was primed to go wrong and it didn't. So let's give them some props for handling it well. And Peter still being with us today.
Yeah, I've heard of these swatting incidents going on before. I do not recall any of the stories yet where things went horrible and the people got shot by accident. So
I have heard of that. Yeah, it has happened. Yeah,
it has happened. Okay. Yeah. I think by and large, our police are a little bit more circumspect in what they're going into, and
I think
it just going guns blazing.
It went bad more like the first time it was a prank. Then after that, now they kind of realize, hey, wait a minute, let's make sure and check it all out. And what's bad is most of the pranksters tend to be from outside the U.S.
Sure, and it came with the technology of being able to disguise your phone number for free and cheap, and once you can do that, well, then you can do just about anything. I know it's happened with gamers because it happened to a guy who was gaming on a live stream, and if you can watch it happen while you're online, well, that just makes it all the more funny to see it happen. But
yeah, different ideas of what's funny.
Yeah. So you're surrounded by tons of comics there, Michael.
You like comics all over the place.
I've got one you don't have.
Oh, really?
I have in my hands here Jawbreakers Lost Souls, the graphic novel. It's got cover by Ethan Van Sciver, story by Richard C. Meyer, who's just breaking into the industry. And it's got the original, it's got the first story that John Malin did all the artwork for.
Looks good.
There's a second and third story in here that Meyer had worked on earlier in his burgeoning career. Definitely a 90s look to that kind of thing there, because that's what he was. Hey, there was a big boom in the 90s. And then, of course, he's got the fan artwork in the back here from people who submitted to him. Miss Sashi's a fan favorite. So, got to have that. So how many copies of this do you got, Mike?
I have none because that was not offered through my distributor for some reason.
Well, we know the reason. And the reason is that Mark Waid didn't want you to be able to sell it. Richard had a contract with Antarctic Press, and I'm sure you probably do have some titles from Antarctic Press. They're in your preview, right?
Yeah.
All right.
We have local creators who publish through Antarctic Press, Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini.
There you go.
Matter of fact, they were here just a few minutes ago, but I couldn't convince them to stay long enough to do a walk-on cameo.
That would have been great. We'd love to have them on. But yeah, this was it was announced that it was going to be published with Antarctic Press, and Mark Waid, a superhero, stood up and said, "Not on my watch," and called Antarctic Press and talked them out of it. So
wow.
Now Mark Waid will be showing up in Austin, Texas sometime this year and standing in front of a judge because Richard Meyer is suing him for tortious interference of a contract.
Yeah, you're not supposed to do stuff like that, yeah.
And seeing as how this book raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000.
Obviously, there's interest for
on IGG. Yeah.
And as retailers, we want to have a participation in something like that.
Absolutely. You get no cut of this. Antarctic certainly doesn't get any cut of it now.
Nope.
And Mark Waid is being sued for $75,000.
Darn.
We'll see how that pans out here.
Yeah, you shouldn't meddle in other people's careers like that. I mean, I've met Mark before. Seemed like a really nice guy when I met him. That was a long time ago. We were both on the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund cruise, and matter of fact, Mark got in a little trouble one time, and I was kind of sticking up for him when he had a little bit of a encounter with a pit boss in the casino there. Mark, his favorite form of gambling was the Caribbean stud poker. That was the only table he would play. I remember one night I was on one of my hot streaks and past Mark, and I saw him standing back behind the crowd because they only had one of the tables open that night. He's like, I'm just waiting, trying to get a chair. Well, my luck on gambling, it's streaky. I'm lucky on even number days. So the first day I'm lucky. Second day I can't win nothing, so I don't play. The third day, I'm even luckier. Fourth day, I'll test it, but sure enough, my luck pattern's holding. It's not lucky. So then the fifth day, I'm winning everything on that fifth day. And so he went back, I guess, the next day on one of my off days, so I was not there. And I guess, one of the pit boss asked him, well, Mr. Wade, how's your cruise going, this, that? And he mentioned to me, he goes, well, I was in last night and I could not get the table I wanted because you only had one open. And the pit boss, contradictor said, no, they're always open. And he goes, well, no, I was here and it wasn't open. And he goes, oh, so are you calling me a liar then? Well, Mark's like, well, no. Well, maybe technically, yes. And about that time, the pit boss is about to kick him out. So he leaves and just gets out of there because obviously the pit boss had a problem. Well, I'm back, hearing about this. And next day I'm back on my hot streak. And of course, let's put it this way, the dice like me. I was at, I'm kind of preferencing what happens next is I was at the crap table. And usually the dealers don't like you to gamble their tip money. But when you put $1 down on boxcars, which pays 31 odds, and you hit it, and you do that like 3 times in 10 minutes, well, they know your name from then on. And of course, I had pit bosses follow me, kind of shaking their head like this guy's just on a streak. And then I mentioned to him about how Mark had been treated, and that was not right. And that pit boss just disappeared. We never saw him again for the rest of the cruise because he was out of line. So I've tried to stick up for Mark in the past, but I'm sorry to hear that he didn't stick up for a fellow creator there.
That's the way you do stick up for people when you do it like that. You don't go to the captain of the ship and say, hey, this guy.
Throw this guy overboard.
Yeah. Don't throw him overboard. Maybe tell him how to do his job a little better. But don't send him back home on a helicopter or something.
Well, that's probably just something to do with all this political craziness that's going on nowadays.
Oh, well, you know what? It's just going to get crazier, I think.
So what did I do? I ran for political office this year and won.
How's that working out for you?
Well, I'm the only guy who kicked out an incumbent. Everybody else was either reelected or filled a vacant seat, and I'm the only ones that kicked their buddy out. And but everybody's, it's been a little chilly maybe from a couple of people. For overall, everybody's pretty well welcomed me in. And I think they realized real fast I'm one of those guys who just rolled up his sleeves, jumped in the boat, and grabbed an oar. So right now it's working out great. But my attitude on politics, because it cost me some votes because when I ran, I didn't declare a party. I didn't declare right. I didn't declare left. And people got mad at me, said, well, I won't vote for you unless you do this or do that. I'm like, to me, everybody's opinion counts. I will fight as hard to defend somebody's opinion on the right as I will for somebody on the left, as long as nobody says that other person is not allowed their opinion. Because everybody's opinion is going to be a little bit different in the country, and everybody's opinion counts because we are the sum of all our parts. And that's just my crazy way of thinking about it.
Well, that's called representing the people who voted you in.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
The people who voted you in are all going to be different.
Yep, and they are. They are.
So I'm looking at that sign hanging behind you there. What is Cursova?
Cursova magazine. That is a magazine started by a fellow. His editorial name is Alexander, and he came in. I've done a lot of independent publishing myself over the years. I had my first independent publication put out back in 1977, and Multiversal Scribe magazine, which you can't find at less than $50 on eBay or Amazon. So I was also a journeyman printer. Then I had years in printing management before I started my own bookstores. And so he came in, hey, can you give me some ideas of how you put a publication together? So I gave him a little bit of advice and this and that. And he went in, did all the hard work, did all the networking, got his first one out. And, when he brought me a sample, I looked at it, I said, man, this looks pretty nice. And so I started submitting him stories of mine. And I was in his second issue. And this is actually going to be my 6th appearance in Cursova magazine. He's restarting it. First of the volume 1 was Cursova, magazine of fantasy and science fiction. This time it's Cursova magazine of thrilling adventure and daring suspense. And so this is the #1 issue of the relaunch of the volume 2. And it's got a little story that I co-wrote with another fellow by the name of Edgar Rice Burroughs. I don't know if you ever heard his name or not.
He's not doing a whole lot these days.
Named Tarzan.
Yeah, Edgar's not doing a lot these days. He was on a hot streak there for a while, but
he's been kind of quiet since 1950. And and this is a he passed away in 1950, and just one of the, let's put it this way, Ray Bradbury called him like the most important writer of all time because he influenced so many people and so many things. It's like Avatar, that ought to say, inspired by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and movies like, I mean, just almost everything you see in fantasy and science fiction, at some point in some way, it was inspired by things that Edgar Rice Burroughs was doing way back in 1912 and on. Matter of fact, he was so worried that his ideas were so different from anything else being made at the time, he submitted his first story under the name of Normal Being, like, there's nothing wrong up here. This head's okay. And, the editors completely botched it. Oh, he must have meant Norman Bean. And he's like, well, now you just killed the whole point of it, And so later, the next hit book, he said, okay, Edgar Rice Burroughs, AKA Norman Bean, so they just completely killed the whole idea. But so he was just doing all these things that other people did. He really kind of created the, planetary romance, and really science fiction, came to being a lot under what he was doing and the editor that he was working with at that time. And so a guy by the name of Bob Davis, who is just relatively unknown unless you read one of my books, where I talk about the history of Edgar Rice Burroughs and the art chronology, but we'll get back to that in a second. While I was doing that art chronology, I kept telling Jim Solis, the president of Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc., hey, when Danton was still alive, he asked me to finish out a short story that Edgar Rice Burroughs had written back in 1930, and he'd handwritten part of it, typed up part of it, and it was one of the discoveries in the safe that they found like 1960s. They'd offered it to several different writers, and they're all like, well, I don't know what to do with this thing. There's some problems with the story. And Denton gave it to me to see if I wanted to finish it out. And it's like, those problems are actually opportunities, I think. And so I came up with what I thought was a great little story. And then Danton died rather tragically. He'd worked his entire life for his grandfather's corporation. And the very day he becomes president of Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc., one of his greatest days of glory, there's a fire that destroys many of his father, John Coleman Burroughs, who did a lot of the covers and a lot of the artwork for Burroughs' later books. They get destroyed in the fire. Transparencies of them get destroyed. His rock collection, his watch collection get destroyed. And Danton was not in very good health. He had Parkinson's. And so, here he's trying to save everything he can. Well, that night he has a heart attack and dies. And what I did not realize that when he died, his knowledge of this fragment went away. So Jim Solis, he was coming in to assist Danton. Well, he ends up becoming the president of Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. And so he had no knowledge that this was actually a Burroughs fragment. I didn't realize that. I thought, oh, sure, he knows what I'm talking about. And because they didn't even have the fragment themselves. I thought for a long while that it had actually gotten burned up in the fire. And so, he's like, didn't want to do anything with it because he thought it was all something I was doing. He's like, no, we've got you working on other stuff right now. And so, time goes along. We were talking about another project, and I was telling him about how I've had some stories published with Kursova. And so there's another project I'm going to be working on them in the future. I don't want to give you any details on it now, but I was talking to Kursova. Hey, would you be interested in doing this in a magazine format whenever this gets completed? And he goes, yeah, sure. And then I was telling him about this other thing. He goes, well, I'd really like to look at that. I was like, well, for some reason they don't want people to see it, but I'll let you look at it. What you got to do, you got to keep this quiet. Don't let anybody else know it or ever see it. And so he, about 2 hours after I sent him the file, he sends me an email going, and it's like McDonald's. I'm loving it. I got to have it. What will it take to get this story? So we worked out the contract, and I mean, the day we're signing the paperwork, I'm on the phone to Jim, president of Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. Now, you do realize Burroughs wrote the first 1,100 words, right? He's like, what? And that's when I realized that he didn't realize, and he didn't realize what I was telling him. I didn't realize what he was telling me, and so we got it all figured out. So it is Young Tarzan and the Mysterious She by Edgar Rice Burroughs and Michael Tierney. He's printing about 2 weeks. It's at the printers now.
So this is going to contradict the notion that the first female that Tarzan ever saw was Jane.
Not necessarily. You got to read the story.
Okay. That's what I was setting you up for there.
Yeah, because what it is the way the fragment opens up, and this is why other writers shied away from it. Tarzan's hanging out with the other apes in the tribe, and they're like, "Hey, did you hear over at the village? They've got this white captive with blonde hair." And that's where it stops. And all the other writers are like, "Well, Jane was the first white person he met. Jane was the first blonde he met. What are they going to do with that?" And I was like, "I know exactly what to do with it. I'm not going to tell you because you got to read the story to find out. But I will say this: that it helped solve something that was always a problem to me in canon." Like, have you ever read Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar?
Not that one. I've read, I think I basically read The Legend of Greystoke, and that was it.
Oh, wow. You really missed out. You haven't read, you've been drinking light beer. You need to get the fine sipping bourbon, the real stuff. And, Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar was actually the first Tarzan book I'd ever read. So that was my introduction. And in it, Tarzan gets amnesia, forgets who he is, and so he's learning who he is. And so I was learning who he was as he was learning who he was. And in there, he's forgotten all about Jane. And he's got beautiful Law of Opar just throwing herself at him. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm like, why? You don't remember Jane? What's the problem here? Because he was reverting back to the age he was at the time of this short story. And then later, though, he still doesn't have his memory. He won't look at Jane. He is charging guns because he's just got to save her. So you beautiful Law, throwing herself at him. Nah, nothing to do with that. Oh, Jane, wow, but damn the torpedoes. I'm charging straight ahead. So this story will explain that behavior. And that's all I'm going to tell you. I think it's a good little story. Everybody who's read it really likes it.
Well, you've got quite a history with Tarzan, going back several years, and you're working on a book that's going to put all of that Tarzan history into a one-stop shop, so to speak.
Well, that's something I've already done. That was published last year in June. It was the Edgar Rice Burroughs 100-Year Archaeology. This is volume 1. This deals with the pulps and gives you the entire history of all the pulps ever made, which were, quite illustrated. I mean, there's just beautiful artwork on them. And this is where the way the stories were all originally published. And so I give you the entire history of every publication there. And it's also kind of a history of the book industry, too, because that's the way books used to be made. I mean, put it this way, 90% of all the books in the paperback explosion of the 60s came from these old pulps. It's amazing how little new stuff has actually been made, especially in recent years. Now, volume 2 was on all the hardcovers and paperbacks. And this is a beautiful cover. I'll put it this way. This is based on the cover that was originally on Land of Terror, an Ace paperback. And Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. has the original Frank Frazetta painting hanging on their walls. So they did a high-resolution scan of this. And this is the best image you'll ever see of that. And in here, I give you the entire history of all the hardcovers that have ever been made, paperbacks in both the U.S. and the U.K. I'm doing a very good job of flipping these here. But I'll go backward, forwards there. But, I started, it's got all the UK stuff, all the paperbacks, hardcovers, and, in both countries. And I don't think anybody's ever done that. And there's a lot of stuff in there that nobody's ever seen. Volume 3 was all the American Tarzan covers. And I'm just going to pick a spot. I'll try to do the flip since I'm not very good at that. See if I pick a good one there. And
you can't pick a bad one.
Yeah. And so it also includes all the crazy mini variants that Dynamite did when they were doing their unauthorized, at the time, of Tarzan, or rather Lord of the Jungle. Since then, they have gotten a license. And then volume 4 covers all the other comics in the U.S. And actually, Tarzan was only the third Burroughs property to be made into a comic. First, you had John Carter Mars with original stories, and you had Pellucidar with an original story, and Tarzan came later. Now, they were doing the newspaper strip reprints, but to have original stories, Tarzan was actually third. And I give you all the U.S. publications for all the different things that they've done. And what's really neat is in the back here, I give you all the British publications they did. Let's try to find a good section here, which they were having a weekly comics made. And what they were doing with these is they were taking photo stills from the movies that were being made at the time, colorizing them. And so these are images that have never been seen in America. The contents were all reprints of newspaper strips rearranged into new stories, because what had happened was during World War II, the Nazi bombers had knocked out and wiped out all their printing plates they had over there. So they were grabbing Spanish plates, rearranging them to fit the comic book format. And they had guys like Michael Moorcock writing new stories to go with the pictures there. So actually, these are kind of like alternate stories of those. So they had to get kind of creative with that.
Now, when it comes to Tarzan comics, I think you've got something else going on in the hopper here, don't you?
Yeah, well, actually, this was not a Tarzan comic, but I have another comic I'm working on with Burroughs. It should launch in the next couple weeks. I'm doing an adaptation called Beyond the Farthest Star with local artist John Lucas. And that should launch in very soon there.
That's going to be a strip, or is that going to be a pamphlet series?
That's going to be an online subscription comic strip available at their comic services. They have a bunch of weekly comics that they come up with every week. You pay a pittance of like $22, and you get them all, every strip, all of them for the whole year. And you can read all the archives, all the ones they've done in the past. So it's a pretty good deal, really, if you want to read do a lot of reading at a cheap price. It's probably one of the better online deals there are.
So you've done a lot of interstellar science fiction writing, and I know a lot of people, we've talked about Tarzan, but we've not talked about your Wild Stars series.
Right. And Beyond the Farthest Stars, not my first trip to the stars. Yeah, I've done a series of comics like here I have a hardcover. This is actually the third version of the of the graphic novel where I collect all my comics from like the 80s and the year 2000s, which and put them all together. Here, on the cover here is made up of images by the Frank Bruner covers for the 2000 series. And this collects everything in there, all in the proper reading order. And so it's a huge graphic novel that gives you the entire history of the Wild Stars. And this one on the hardcover, it'll have pages that where the outer covers and inner covers were in color, it would give them that. Now, if you don't want to spend the $30 for the hardcover, I do have it in a cheaper trade paperback, and which is just straight black and white. These are a lot easier to flip too. And
who's doing the art on that?
The art on this was done by myself, David Brewer, and the large majority of it was done by a fellow by the name of Dave Simons, who sadly is no longer with us. Dave passed away. And so then I have another one, a sequel to it, was based on another little spin-off comic of the Wild Stars called Force Majeure. And that was going to connect with my next Wild Star story arc. Well, for various reasons, Armando was not able to complete the trilogy. So I had the first book published, and I only had a few pages of the second one. So what it is, I wrapped an 83,000 word novel around it. And so this has all the original comics, plus all the unpublished comics, and lots of flashback illustrations all the way through it too. Then, on top of that, last year, through Kursova, I said, this is actually the 6th Kursova story I've done. The first story I did with them in their issue 2 was called Shark Fighter, a psychological horror story. The next story I did after that was called The Bears of 1812. I think it was at issue 5, where I take Sacagawea from her time in the Lewis and Clark expedition through her time in St. Louis, which is the same time when the the Mississippi River ran backwards because of that Madrid fault.
Yeah.
Earthquake. And then I take her on into the War of 1812. And, there's all these different legends about what happened to her after the Lewis and Clark. One is that she went to a house of the dead where people went to die, basically in St. Louis. Another one says that she went to Washington, D.C. And another one said that she went back to join her people and the Shoshone. And like half the people, or 3/4 of the people of Shoshone, claimed to be her direct descendant. So I figured out a way to work all those things together. And along with, War of 1812, there was some incredible stuff going on. I mean, you had the British took over Washington, D.C., burned the White House, burned the Congress, burned the shipyards. And, our forces just fled right in front of them. And you had Madison, President Madison, leading the cannon fire in the retreat. Dolly Madison going down in a wagon right in front of the troops, carrying Washington's painting out of the city as the troops are marching on it. So while the British are occupying Washington, D.C., the worst hurricane in history hits the British fleet. And while the troops are all camped in the middle of Washington, D.C., you have tornadoes come down out of the sky, smack right in the middle of their encampment, and killed like 25% of their guys. So like I told the editor when I sent the story, and I said, the stuff you think I made up is the stuff that really happened. So it's just incredible stuff. I mean, you had the bombing of Fort McHenry, the making of the Star Spangled Banner. It was a fun little story. Then I read, after that, I had a couple little shorts. One is the criteria for joining the intergalactic community, which deals with a president in office. I don't actually say the name of the president, but I kind of leave that up to the readers. Most readers will kind of tend to slant one way, but it's a quick short story with kind of like a double twist ending. Another one that they published just last year was called Jack's Basement. And it's a social kind of horror humor story. And on that one, it's like a young man, and I guess I can go ahead and tell you the whole story, but there is kind of a little bit of a twist at the end. Is that this was kind of comic related? That's why I'll go and tell you the whole story. But yeah, I kind of open up with where you think you're kind of in another one of the Sixth Sense, and the psychologist talked to mother. She's worried about her child, and he's drawing these really terrible apocalyptic pictures. He thinks, man, he's describing the end of the universe coming up. Black holes going to suck up the earth or whatever. And so he goes, take a look at his room, in the basement where he's living, looking at all the art. And he goes, there's just something familiar about this. So then he comes back later. He's got all these comic books, and he's like, well, ma'am, all these pictures. And she's like, he's been drawing more. Look at this. It's terrible art. And she goes, well, that's the Fantastic Four. What it was is they were living in the house where Jack Kirby used to live, and somehow he was channeling Jack. He's drawing a lot of Jack's old pictures, and he's trying to tell her, like, okay, that's Galactus. Then he makes a mistake. That's the devil dinosaur. She goes, I knew a devil had to do something with that. What about this picture? Well, that's the demon. But that was really more of a swipe of, about Hal Foster, and basically the story ends with her going, look, and she's like, ma'am, he's not possessed by the devil. He's channeling a comic book artist. He goes, well, that's even worse. Now Simon will never move out of the basement. And you got that extra twist on that end there. Most people think, oh, well, he's a comic book artist. That's the twist ending, but it's the fact that Simon and Kirby which anybody who knows a lot about comics will get that extra twist. So that was
Absolutely.
another one. And then another story they published last year, right at the same time Chronology was coming out, was this one right here. Actually, let me show you a different cover. Maybe I didn't bring that one. But this one is a nice wraparound cover by Mark Wheatley. I can put two of them together, give you the whole picture here.
Very nice.
And that was the variant cover that they did. It was Kursova. This is only Kursova, and then also another Mark Wheatley, another wraparound cover. And that's the limited hardcover. Only 52 copies of that were made. That was Wild Stars 3. Now, another story I'm working on right now, and Kursova will probably be doing that later this year, is the sequel to that. Both these are novelettes, and whenever I do Wild Stars 3, this is actually the 35th anniversary of me doing Wild Stars comics, books, graphic novels, and portfolios. And so I'll be coming out with that in a book later this year, which I'll probably put both the one from last year and the one from this year all together in the third volume. And the editions you saw earlier were the 30th anniversary edition. So time to come out with the 35th anniversary editions.
Definitely time for it. Now, of course, when I first met Wild Stars through you, it was almost 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
And there was an interesting little legal battle going on that you won.
Yeah, I won. It's one of those things that was really ugly. It was really awful. I'm still very upset about it, but I'm not supposed to talk about it. But the fact is, someone else tried to appropriate my trademark. And I'm like, no, you're not taking my trademark away. And they didn't.
Yep. So comic book readers watching this, if you used to collect a book called Wild Star and you don't see that book anymore, do some research, because we know where it went and why it's not being published anymore.
You can talk about it. I'm not supposed to, but I can do all my Wild Stars now. I don't have to worry about anybody else muddying up the water.
All right. I'm going to take a moment here to do a little bit of shilling for the site, because Critical Blast is doing this for the love of comics, but also we like to eat and we have to move. So if you are into reading some urban fantasy, our newest book is out right now called Gods and Services. It is available from Amazon, and it's an anthology with some really good writers involved in this. We have Ira Bloom has a story in this. He's a writer for Scholastic. He did Hearts and Other Body Parts. We also have David Peterson, who's done the 5 large angst novels, as well as the really, I almost said bestseller, but I think that's a trademark term, but it's a really good seller called Claude Makes a Friend, which is making waves in the YA market. We've also got a lot of new voices that haven't been heard a lot of from, but they've done some really great work, and we're hoping this helps them make a step up. Anyway, if you go to the Amazon link that we will put in the description after this, you can go to Amazon and help us out by picking that up. Also, because time is running out on our move here, we have gone ahead and opened up a GoFundMe. So yes, we're going to put the link out for that too. We really tried to make the money off of the book sales and off the t-shirt shop, which we'll also link. But if you just don't have anything that you want to read, or you don't have any t-shirts you want to pick out to wear, you can always throw us a couple of nickels through the GoFundMe. And here's a little secret. If you do go to the Amazon link and you decide that you don't want the book, if you buy something else on Amazon while you've gone through that link, that still helps us out, because you've gone through our Amazon referral. So go to Amazon today. It's a good day to do it. It's cold outside, nothing else to do. What are you going to do, right? Coming back to talk with Michael Tierney, the local comic shop guy, which I think is going to be our trademark name for you, Michael.
Okay.
The LCS.
You actually left out one of the authors of your in your anthology.
I was, I know, and I had him on live stream just 2 live streams ago. Last week we were talking with Jim Ballant and Holly Golightly on the 19th anniversary of Broadsword, and then yes, we did have John Delarose with us talking comics and what was going on with the mobs and everything, and talking about the work that he's doing writing comics and writing science fiction. Yes, John Delarose has a great Christmas story in Gods and Services. And it's basically, Gods and Services is a book about, if you go to this mysterious shop that pops up and you buy something, it usually has a god attached to it that nobody's been worshiping for a while, and he wants attention. So he is now going to repay you for your purchase by making your life better, whether you want to or not. But some of the stories deviated from that, and John's definitely was one of those, because it was a story about Krampus, the Yule Lord. And what we did was we put a framework story around everything. So John's story was more of like, well, how do you acquire these gods? He's like, well, they just have trouble acclimating to the modern world. For instance, Krampus was a lonely person and just didn't know what to do anymore. And then we tell the story of him using this online dating service for monsters and who he meets and how it doesn't quite pan out for him. So that was a fun story. They're all good stories, though. Ira Bloom's story is hilarious. John's story is hilarious. But then you'll get Ross Baxter's, whose story is just bone-chilling, and others that were just, they stop and make you think, or they'll scare you to death. And it's a good mix. I think it's a great mix, really. And we're looking forward to do another one of these as soon as we can move out of this hotel and actually move back into a real home-based business for.
And I had a short story there too.
I know. I was waiting for you to bring it up.
Okay. I was trying to help.
Yeah. See, you told me we had another author, so I had to go to John De La Rosa. I'm like, no, tell us what you wrote. Michael Tierney, yes, you have a short story in there. So. Yeah, we need to get some books in your shop so we can do some multiple signings or something.
Yeah, definitely like to get some in there. Yeah, right now I have to go through Amazon and buy them like everybody else there.
Yep. Well, you can get the author's discount. You just go through me. We'll take care of that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely get some that way because I had some people looking for it.
Okay. Yeah, I can have them sent to you at the author's discount.
Sounds like a plan.
We'll do that. Comic books. This is what you're in the business of selling and making money at when you're not writing stories. What is it what's moving out this past month? Been 4 weeks or more since we've talked. And what have you bought that's just sitting on the shelf and not going anywhere?
Well, I'm pretty tight on ordering things. It's one of those things that's kind of funny. One of the worst catalogs I ever did was I was going on a dive vacation, took the previews catalog, which is what Diamond sends out of all the upcoming publications. I mean, I read that thing from front to back, studied. I thought this is going to be the best order I ever turned in. And it was one of the worst I ever turned in because like, oh, people are going to want that. No, they didn't, And so then I learned that just to wait, do it at the last. And I'm going through the catalog and like, wow, this looks really great. And not one person has asked about it. So guess what? It's not that good a book. And so it's just all what do your customers want. That's what it's all about ordering. And so I'm doing a pretty good job on ordering the stuff. It's kind of funny because I've been hearing about how sales are down around the industry because everybody's been cutting back on their orders. I've been doing that for a long time ago. Right now, my sales are actually up. So I'm not seeing the decline everybody else is seeing. I'm seeing an incline. I think what everybody else is doing adjustments that I did a long time ago and not just getting stuck on all the stuff because the plethora of number ones that Marvel just keeps chunking out. It's just not working. One thing DC is doing good is that they're keeping their series going. You don't have 20 new number ones every month because they don't sell. Back when I started in this business in the 80s, a number one was a big deal because there weren't a lot of them. And, when a book came out, it would be around for a while. So a number one was important. Nowadays is like, they won't even tell us when it's a mini series. So we just don't order anything. I'll tell you, some of the worst selling books are when they try to do weekly books because you haven't given it the time to develop a fan following. And, I carry an extensive back issue selection and those weekly books just never sell out of back issue because they didn't develop the following like a monthly does. As far as what's selling, I mean, they finally brought back Uncanny X-Men. It's still trying to bring back its readership. Fantastic Four actually had a stronger reception for all the books returning from Marvel, but now they've just kind of been slow getting that out again. And that's another thing that's always hurt the industry is shipping late. I used to hear people complain all the time about how terrible Jim Shooter was an editor. But I'll tell you what, when Jim Shooter was the editor, those books always shipped on time. They had to put a filler issue in there. They put a filler issue in there. But when you expect the book to be there, it was there. That's really good for the readerships that they can rely on it. You do not frustrate your customers. Another thing he always did that's been lost in the modern age of graphic novels, that everything's being written towards the eye of collecting a graphic novel later, is, one of the things he did great was every issue, treat it like it's somebody's first issue. You could find your way in. You bought a comic, you found your way in, you could get familiar with the characters. Sometimes they went a little too far, though. I remember when Jim Owsley replaced Jim Shooter. Well, I mean, I think he might have been the editor down after Jim Shooter was gone. But I remember when Owsley was writing a Fantastic Force #1, and the character's going, now strikes Huntaris, and she gives her whole biography. She's about to hit somebody, and she goes, here's who I am, and here's my life story. That's going too far. I mean, so there's an art to it. You got to get it right. You don't want to make it cumbersome and make it into a problem. Well, now they just don't even do it at all, and it makes it hard for new readers to come in. I have people come in all the time wanting to discover comics, and they're either trying to start in the middle of a story, or even if they do start in the right spot, they still don't have a way to connect with the characters anymore. And that's one of the things that's kind of hurting the industry. It's almost kind of like a closed camp. I remember Will Eisner one time was describing trying to break into the comic book industry to me as trying to break into an armed camp, because it's like you can't get in. There's so many barriers for new talent coming into the industry. And,
did you just name drop Will Eisner?
Yeah. Will was a nice guy. I had he was on that Comic Book Legal Defense Fund cruise also, so I had several chances to talk with him, and he was a very nice guy. I met a lot of great people on that cruise. It really formed my opinion of the comic book industry more than anything else I've ever done. All the conventions you go to, you just get little snippets of meeting people. I'm here when you're actually getting to eat dinner with these people, drink beer with Frank Miller, drinking Miller Lite, talking to Frank Miller, things like that. Those are great. You get to know them. You get to know who is approachable, who is not. Some people, your opinion of them goes down. Some of them, your opinion goes up. And that was a lot of fun. And I had the advantage too. I was like the only comic book retailer on the cruise. So I was like the most popular guy, because they were like, hey, how do I get my books to sell in your store? So it was a great chance to get to know all those guys. And, so a lot of things that my opinions were kind of formed on that, and learn from them. And I don't know how much they listened to me, but it was great to have a chance to talk to them. Met a lot of great people. I mean, I could go on all the different people I met there.
Well, I don't think breaking into the comic industry has changed any since Eisner gave you that advice, because it seems like it's even more entrenched and more of an armed encampment, almost to the point of being literal these days.
Oh, yeah. Well, it just kind of blew my mind. At that time, Bob Schreck was the Batman editor. And it blew my mind at that time. Okay, so let's use Frank Miller as an example. When he worked at DC, Bob Schreck was his editor. When he worked at Dark Horse, at that time, Diane Schultz was his editor. Also, who was the other fella who did some, I can't think of his name right now. Who's the guy who did Grendel? Matt Wagner.
Matt Wagner.
Well, Matt Wagner, when he worked at, it was the same type of thing. And he was married to Diane Schultz's sister. So, I mean, it's just everybody knew. And also, too, Diane Schultz and Bob Schreck used to be married. So it just almost it's amazing how small knit the family are. I mean, and, Frank's a really nice guy. I enjoyed meeting him. He was a good guy, as was Bob and Diane, all of them. They were really great people to meet. Matt and all of them, too. So it was a lot of fun meeting everybody on that cruise.
All right, so Uncanny X-Men's coming back. Fantastic Four is coming back. Obviously, the one that everybody's trying to push right now, because there's a movie coming out, is Captain Marvel. How is Captain Marvel working out in the stores for you?
There's people coming in. It's put this way: it sells more to people who just curious about the movie than it's actually selling to people who buy the comics. It's just she's just not really connected with the readers, because there's just been too many transitions, too many changes. It's like, back in the 80s, the problem with the comic industry back then was it was too static. You knew no matter how wild the story got, by the end of the story, everything was going to be back to status quo. Nowadays, there is no status quo. I mean, you can't find firm ground to stand on. And again, that's all goes back to how hard it is for new readers to find their way in. A lot of these people who are interested in the movies, want to buy the comics, they'll come in and buy a couple comics, but you don't see a lot of return from these people. These books are not connecting with the readers. They're not pulling them into their universes and getting them back for more. And that's what really tells you. The sign of a good book is a book where the people keep coming back because they've got to know what happens next.
And what books are doing that?
Well, I mean, it's stable readerships. I mean, it's just like, I remember, Strangers in Paradise. I mean, it's had a stable readership all this time. It doesn't go up, doesn't go down. And those kind of books I like as a retailer, I know how to order it. It's kind of funny because I've carried that book since issue 1. And this is a story that was told to me by Terry Moore. Now, this is out at Comic-Con where he was telling me this story. I was up for Retailer of the Year one year. I didn't win, but I had to go see. And he was telling me this story about, and I didn't realize what was going on until later. Until he told me this story. But it's like, had this nice little old lady come into the store and asked us to order the very first issue. So we got it in, and she bought it, and she kept on buying it for quite a long time. When I got that in as a special order, it's like, hey, it looks pretty good. I think I can sell more of this. So I always carried a good supply of them from the very beginning, and I had probably one of the bigger readerships for a store my size of Strangers in Paradise in the country. Well, found out that what it was, that little lady was his mother-in-law's sister, who had heard that her sister's son-in-law was going to be doing an adult comic. And so she was going to adult bookstores looking for this thing. And I'm sure they were like, it's a raid when she walked through the door. And so they finally, somebody said, hey, try going to a comic book store. And that's how she found me. And, and I, of course, ordered it for her right away. And that's one of the complaints I hear about stores around the country is when people come in, say, will you get this book for me? A lot of stores around the country won't do that. And that's just something that just blows my mind. I mean, if somebody wants a book, that's our job. Let's get it for them.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Michael, I think we've run out of topics for today, but we want to have you back on next month.
Sounds good.
You know, we'll do some more of the same, talk about what's new in the comic book stores and find out what's selling, what's not, and whether anybody's making course corrections. Because I think we want to see some course corrections in the comic book industry, bring more people in. But until then, my friend.
Yeah, well, one of the craziest things too, there's just so much product right now, and you know, and sometimes people come in and they're just overwhelmed, but nothing's really connecting so much. I mean, it's almost you know, the Tower of Babel. There's so many voices talking right now. People are, you know, saying, okay, this is the thing where I start, and so it's great. Is we've got a great selection of stuff. Not so much for the kids, but you know, the comic book industry is healthy as far as content right now. It's just not so healthy on hits.
Gotcha. Well, let us know if anybody comes in looking for Captain Marvel and picks up some back issues with Monica Rambeau and wonders what happened.
Yeah, I'll let you know if they come in and look at the Captain Marvel Jawbreakers crossover.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael. We'll talk to you again soon.
Good talking to you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.